Okay, everyone, so for this last piece, what we're going to do is we're actually going to take our lovely sort of sorting loop here, and we're going to package it up into our own function, right? So functions to me are just like recipes. Here what we've done is we've created a bunch of code that does something moderately useful, which is that it distinguishes between things published by the New York Times and things published by Le Monde. Now, we might want to be able to do something like this in more than one place, right? Or more than one time. So we might have, for example, multiple lists of articles, right? And we want to be able to perform this set of actions on each of them. So in order to package up our code, we're going to create our own function. And actually creating our own function is really quite simple. It's going to require us to change a couple of things, but really not many. So the first thing that we're going to do is we have to name our function. So in this case, I'm going to name my function, right? And I do this by saying function, right? So the same way that when we say var, it means create a box in memory. When we use the term function, it means create a recipe, name this recipe. And so I'm going to say function, find isn't a good one. See how that turned red? That's because that's kind of a reserved word. I'm going to say identify. Oh no, I guess that's, sorry, my mistake. I guess it's actually doing this because it's a function name. So I'll call it find ny times. Okay. And recall that when we have these round parentheses, that's the symbol for a function, right? So if you go back to the JavaScript as a natural programming, JavaScript as a natural language set of slides, this is how we identify a function. So we'll talk a little bit about what the round parentheses mean in a moment, but just to note that as with everything in JavaScript, I encompass my code, and I'll include the console log in there. I encompass my code by wrapping it in curly braces, right? So now in this function, right, this recipe includes all of the code between these curly braces. So this idea of kind of, things wrapping around each other, so you can sort of think of it as concentric circles, is, permeates our work in this area. Now, remember what we said about indenting. Indenting is important to indicate what is inside one thing or another. And what's handy about Aptana is that if I just highlight all of the lines of code that I want to indent and hit tab, it's going to indent all of them by one. It's a really, really nice way of kind of packaging up, of making sure that my formatting is consistent and informative. Okay, so I've now created a function called find ny times, and I have packaged it up. So let's see what happens when we go to the page. Uh-oh, what's wrong? Well, here's the thing, is that before, if you think about it, before we had, our code was just, again, our computer was reading left to right, top to bottom. Our browser was reading it this way. And so everything that it came into contact with, it was just like, oh, okay, I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that. The thing that's special about functions is they give us a way to, these function recipes, give us a way to package up a set of code, and we don't have to, but they don't happen until we explicitly tell the computer that we want them to happen. So I can have this recipe here, but I'm not going to cook the recipe, if you will, or interpret the recipe until I actually call the function. And in that case, I would, in order to do that, I just put the name of the function here, right? I need to make sure that it's matches the function name I gave it, right? So copying and pasting is a good thing to do. I can do that, right? And now, if I reload the page, we'll see that it executes just fine. One more thing that we want to do, because if you'll notice, if we go back to Aptana, what you'll notice is that I have this list of articles here, and I've called it my articles, right? And I'm able to, and so inside my function, I've referred to my articles. Now, that's fine if I only have one list that I want to sort, right? But what if I have a second list that has a different name and I want to be able to sort that as well? In order to do that, what I need to make sure is that my recipe, my function recipe, is prepared to accept ingredients, right? And the ingredient that I'm going to be most concerned with in this recipe is the list, is giving it the list that it's intended to sort. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, look, this function, this recipe, find New York Times, needs some input. It needs an ingredient. And the ingredient that it needs is the name, the variable name of a list of items, right? Some kind of list. So I'm going to say article list, okay? So this one is a little bit tricky, but the way that I like to think about this is that this is going to be the local name. So inside the when we pass a list into this function, right? When we give this function a list as an ingredient, the function is going to relabel that list, okay? And it's going to relabel that list according to the name that we give it between the parentheses. Okay, it's a little bit like how most of you have some kind of identification card probably issued by by a government organization. Maybe it's a passport, or passport's a great example. If as we know from our classes, you're fortunate enough to have a passport. But so imagine you have a passport, but of course within Columbia University, how does Columbia University identify us, right? Of course it knows that it knows your name from your passport, but very often what we do is we describe things via unis, right? So similarly, within the context of this function, the label, right, the identification that we're going to use to refer to that list of objects that has been provided to us as an ingredient for this function, we're going to refer to it as article list, okay? So what that means is that in the two places where originally I referenced my articles, I'm going to change that to article list, which is the local name for, I'm going to actually put this in the comments here, right? So in this case, so article list is the local name for whatever list is provided to the find NY_Times function as an ingredient. Okay? Hopefully that kind of makes sense. If not, I promise it will become more familiar at least. Now, what that means is that when I try to find, if I try to run my code again, I'm going to reload this. And now it's actually saying, hey, it's kind of giving me this weird error. It's saying, cannot read property length of undefined on line 119. So I go to line 119 and I see, okay, it's saying, right, article list.length. And so it cannot find, so it's implying that article list is undefined. Well, of course it is, because down here, when I told the computer to run the function, right, to use that recipe, find New York Times, I didn't give it anything to work with. So I have to make sure that I pass it the name of a list of article objects, right? And if I do that, everything works fine. Now, just to illustrate briefly that this means that I can now do this process on another list, right? I'm going to take this and I'm actually just going to copy this list, and I'm going to just rearrange the order of things, right? Again, this is just, for demonstration purposes, so you can kind of see how this works, confirm that it does work, right? I'm not making it up. And so instead, on this case, I'm going to have, it's going to be a Le Monde, and then a New York Times, and a Le Monde, and a New York Times. And of course, I have to give this a unique name, right? I can't have, I could leave it as just my articles, but then I would be overwriting, right? I'd be putting this new list into the box called my articles. So I'm going to say my articles 2, and I'm going to call, we call it calling a function, right? So executing the recipe or making the recipe is called calling the function. Okay, I'm going to do it with both of them. And I'm going to just put a little message in between here. So I can say log first list. I should do it beforehand. So I'm going to say first list so I can check. So it's a little bit easier for me to tell the difference. Log second list. Okay. And now if I come over here and I reload and I see, here's my first list, and you can see that the first and the last objects are the New York Times objects. And here I've got the second list, and the second and fourth objects are the New York Times objects. Okay, so now we've really done it all because we've done loops, conditionals, and functions. And that, my friends, is all. That's all there is. Everything that you see on the internet is built out of these components. And when we start working with libraries, okay, libraries are just recipe books. And so sometimes we're able to use recipes that other people have written. We use them in the same way that we would use our own. Obviously, we have to do some reading up to know what ingredients they need and make sure that we have those ingredients prepared to give to them. But this is sort of how it all happens. So that's pretty much it. And we will go over this during class on Monday. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post them to Piazza. See you soon.